everybody, and welcome back to the channel. It's your girl, Lori. I want to talk to you about when you know it's time to leave a relationship. Okay, so before we go in this isn't like some big blanketed statement like, hey, Bob in Nebraska and Tiffany in Maine, this is the right and wrong way to do it. I'm telling you some steps that you can take to reevaluate your relationship. Now, when I say relationship, I don't just mean partners, like lovers, things like that. I don't just mean that. Yes, that, but also family members, friends, work. Relationships aren't just intimate. I mean, I guess to some levels, all relationships are intimate because you get to know somebody personally and all that stuff. But one of the biggest things that I get is like, oh my God, I feel bad if, like, one good way to know that it's good to be out of a relationship, this is in like a love perspective. If you are not in it anymore, if you're like, man, I've just fallen out of love. And by the way, that does happen. Sometimes there's no other reason except for you fell out of love. People want there to be these like, you cheated on me or something, like you're always looking for it to be something. No, sometimes people just fall out of love with people. They grow. You know, we as humans, typically every 7 to 10 years, we have like this big shift internally in the way that we live in just our lives. It's just how that works. And so sometimes your shift is one way and somebody else's shift is another way. That's number one. Stop trying to make a connection continue to happen. Now, let's be very clear in this. The butterflies, oh, I'm so excited to see you, the act of sex and different things like that, all that's going to like start to wane. It's going to diminish. So that's why you always want to build your relationships on friendships and always be authentically who you are. So number one way in a love relationship to know it's time to leave is if you say, I really kind of want to get out of this, I just don't want to hurt the other person. Okay. A, your ego has just completely taken you over. So you think you're being selfless. You think you're like, oh my God, I really don't want to hurt this person. Yeah, here's the fact behind that though. You're hurting the person anyway. Because if you're staying with somebody out of like pity or out of the fear of hurt, you are no better than what you think that you're trying to be, because you're not freeing that person up. Now it gets really bad if you're like, well, I don't really want to be with them. I don't really want them to be with anybody else either. Wow, that's a whole different ballgame of ego, and absolutely want to like book a session with me yesterday, because you don't get to say you don't want somebody, but then you don't want somebody else to have them either. No, we're not doing that. So a good way to understand it is if you feel completely disconnected, understanding, number two, understanding what is your why. Why do you like the relationship that you are in? Friendships, love relationships, and even work relationships, right? Why do you like the ones that you have? Let's look for the positive, because very often you're going to look for the negative, right? And if you look for a red flag, I guarantee you will find one, even if it's not really a red flag. Okay. But when you look at somebody and say, okay, it's good to look and say, well, what do I actually like about this person? Like, what do I like? Not the person, the relationship, not the person. Do it based on the relationship. What do I like about it? Now, if you struggle with understanding what it is that you like about it, not codependency, not like, well, this person's here for me all the time. That's great. But are you reliant upon it? That's not okay either. So now you got to check yourself, because that goes into codependency. Doesn't mean you have to end the relationship, but you definitely want to transition it out of a codependency. And I have a podcast on codependency, because codependency can really like wreak havoc on all of your relationships, all of them. And so when you evaluate the like, and let's say you're like, wow, okay, because sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes you need, because we get so concentrated on, like, even within your own self, like, oh my God, I have so many things I still want to achieve. Yeah, but look at all the things you did achieve. So it's the exact same thing for relationship. Do you like someone, and do the things, the relationship and the person, do you like more than you dislike? Right? Because here's the reality. If you think that everybody is going to do everything that you want them to, that's not a thing. So you want to establish what your deal breakers are for yourself, and understand that people don't have to change for you. Your worker, your coworker, your boss, nobody has to change for you. And you don't have to change for anybody either. So if you're in a relationship of any sorts, right? And work goes a little different. So we're going to put that aside for a minute, because sometimes you don't get to pick those people, but I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. On like when is probably a good time to like start to consider maybe exiting the job. But anywhere you go, there you are. So keep that in mind. So it's important that if you like something in the relationship more than you dislike it, then you're going to have to say, okay, well, I'm going to have to like start to accept some of this stuff. But if you like 90% of it, and then that one or two things like really rubs against your deal breakers, and your deal breaker list shouldn't be this long. Like your deal breakers really should be a smaller thing where the flexibility and the like negotiables should be a lot longer, right? Because you want to not be so this, because then you get into your ego. So that's a good way to know. Like I said, stop saying you don't want to leave a situation because you're afraid of hurting someone. You're already doing it. Because if you're not in that relationship, get out. Let them live their best life and let them find someone who may be a better fit for them. Has to happen. Okay, so that's one way. Well, there's really two ways, right? Because we talked about that. So here's another thing. Work. I'm going to bring work back into this. Number one, I don't care who is in charge of your paycheck. No one has the right to just talk to you any old way that they want to. Okay, I don't mean they're being stern, because you're going to have to not get your feelings hurt all the time. If somebody's giving you constructive criticism at work, you're going to have to be able to take it. If you can't, that's on you. But if they're coming at you really sideways, I mean hardcore sideways, then you can say, literally, I do not allow myself to be spoken to that way. I don't care that it's your boss. The reality is you do not allow, don't say, don't talk to me that way. Don't say you hurt my feelings. No, I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. And then you can walk away. Okay? Like seriously, you have to be willing to stand up for yourself, but not defend yourself. Defending yourself is not anything that I'm always asking you to do. I'm always going to tell you to do the exact opposite. Stand up for yourself, right? And there's a difference. So if you're like, why would you listen to Becky? Becky's lying. Okay, so now you sound erratic because you're trying to defend yourself. If you're always going into defensive, I need to be right, remember this rule of thumb. You can be right or you can be happy. Make your choice. You want to keep going and being right, go ahead. You have to know if it becomes so much of a toxic work environment, then yes, you can look elsewhere, but be very mindful that there's always going to be a level of negativity from some people anywhere you go. So you have to ask yourself, listen, if you're like, nobody's hearing me, I feel undervalued, might be facts, might not be, but then you do have a chance to leave. But just keep in mind, you might be looking for something that just doesn't exist when it comes to work. Because there's going to be people, some might pull more work than the others, some might call out more than the others. If you're going to sit there and overjudge it, that's your problem. That's your issue to process. If it's that toxic for you, then you consider leaving that. But be clear that anywhere you go, there you are. And not everyone is you, and you don't have expectations on your work ethic onto other people. I've been doing this job for a long, long time. And everybody who has work issues says, this person does less work than me, and okay, it's going to happen. Be okay with it. You can accept it or you can move on. But that's the thing with work. But don't just allow somebody to run their mouth. I'm not talking about your coworkers, because you can say the same thing. I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. Don't engage in the gossip, right? If somebody's around the water cooler and they want to talk mad smack, you need to check yourself, not them. Don't check them and say, hey, you know what? I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't like to talk about people behind their back. And you can walk away. Because the reality is, if they're pulling you into it and you're engaging in that gossip, you can't judge them for it, because now you're part of it. And trust me, if they're talking about somebody to you, they're definitely talking about somebody about you, and let that happen. When it comes to a smear campaign, you do not engage. I know you want to. Do not constantly feel like you have to defend yourself. And if you're doing that in any relationship and you feel like you're trying to one up people and all that stuff, that's a you issue. It isn't always the other person. So how you know to start deciding when you want to get out of a relationship is, first and foremost, you have to understand what your non-negotiables are. With the understanding that no one has to do them, right? People can be who they are. So you can authentically allow someone to be who they are. What you don't get to do is say, I really want this relationship and I want them to fit into my narrative. No, that's control. You have to be willing to radically accept, this may not be for me. And that could be with your mother. That could be with your kids. That could be with your sister. It could be with anyone. And you must also respect where somebody else is. People may just distance from you because they're on a different part of their journey. It doesn't make them better. It doesn't make them worse. So ask yourself those questions. Is this relationship, is it giving Is it making me feel good more than it's making me feel bad? It's a really good indicator on when you should get out of that relationship. Because if not, you're going to get really annoyed and you're going to get really irritated because people aren't changing and they don't have to. Okay. So just give yourself a little bit of time and space. If you don't want to be in a relationship, please exit it. You're not saving anybody or protecting anybody by staying. Free them up and let them go find somebody who's going to allow them to live their best life.